Me. Oh, 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 there we go. Here we go. Welcome back, Liz. There she is. Woo.
Great. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning, everybody who is watching us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, or listening to us in Clubhouse. So this is another beautiful day in Tokyo, actually the first beautiful day after the typhoon. So it is great to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. This is the 135th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with CEO of Langley Esquire, Timothy Langley, and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. Again, I'm not going to keep you waiting here because Timothy has a lot of things to talk about today. And that's why I'm just giving you the floor now, Timothy. It's yours. Let's start.
Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody. And once again, thank you very much for everybody that tunes in and for talking about what we do here every week, talking to your friends, passing it along. You know, not a week passes when we don't hear in the news something that we have discussed on this briefing previously. So we're a little bit ahead of the news cycle. So please continue to tune in. There's two parts of this briefing. There's the briefing that I give. I try and keep it to 30, 35 minutes. I went long last week. I went almost an hour last week. And then there's the Q&A portion. Today I've got to run at 10. So Maya, if we can wrap this up, I'll try and keep my comments brief. But first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Please continue to hit like and share with your friends and colleagues, and by all means, comment one way or the other, and join us in the Q&A period because it's always very vibrant. Tectonic change is surrounding us. If you've been following the news, there are things that are going on that are occupying the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida right now, and that's why some of our news is focused on external factors, and the rest of it is focused on the internal factors. But it all culminates in impacting culture, law, society, business, and of course, politics is kind of the driving force there. Politics typically begins to influence culture and policy, the economy, a little bit ahead of what actually is revealed. And sometimes the things that are coming out, for example, the economy, the depreciating yen, encourages and compels policy actions at the political level. So we're watching those, and those are the focus of our briefing. So let me get right to it. It's been very active. The Prime Minister is on a 7-day journey. He's been in Jakarta for 3 days. He is now in India for the G20. He was in Jakarta for the ASEAN. There was a lot going on there. There was, I don't know, maybe it's the season of snubs. Joe Biden did not show up. He sent his vice president. Xi did not show up. He's a little bit angry with India, and also he's got his own things going on. Vladimir Putin also, of course, didn't attend. He wasn't invited. But he is active in his own way, meeting with our dear leader Kim Jong-un, probably in Vladivostok this week, to talk about an exchange of military hardware for missile technology and that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on that occupies the Prime Minister. He will be back this week, probably on Tuesday, and then he's got a very busy schedule. He's going to shuffle the cabinet on the 13th, I believe that's Wednesday. Then he has his confab, a two-day confab with his faction. His faction is the fourth largest in the LDP. So it's not as if he's playing second fiddle, but he is playing second fiddle. He's got other contenders that he needs to meld his policies with and consult with and get their buy-ins. Sometimes he doesn't get what he wants, and so you never hear about it. But there is a lot of backroom politics that goes on a daily basis. He's occupied, like I said, right now for the next couple of days. When he comes back, then the dams will burst, and he will be in Tokyo now for a very brief period. He goes to the UN the following week, probably on Saturday of next week, of this week, actually. And then when he comes back, there will be a lot of political activity, not a snap election, but building up from launching his new cabinet. All eyes are on who he's going to pick, who's going to stay in position, who's going to be shuffled out, what he does with those who are shuffled out. So there's a lot of complexity there that I'd like to get into a little bit more, but there are other issues that are going on. You might have heard that there is a new COVID variant, and I know people are smacking their foreheads thinking, yeah, sure, what's going on this time? But there is a new COVID variant that is beginning to raise its head. It is called BA2.86. You've probably heard of it before, but it is the Ministry of Health announced on Friday that there are a couple of infections here in Tokyo. This is the first time for it to hit Japan. And over the last couple of weeks, there were, in the entire population of Japan, there were 17.8 people who were infected with this new variant. That rose the next week, just last week, 2 weeks ago, to 19 individuals. And then this last week, there were 20 individuals. So it's not like an epidemic. It is not like a landslide of infections, but the government is being very, very cautious here. The drug companies, as you can imagine, are trying to gear up for that. In fact, of this new variant that you're hearing a lot about, Joe Biden's wife caught it. Her symptoms were very mild, as this variant has a mild infection rate and mild symptoms for those who have been vaccinated by earlier, inoculations. So she's ill with it, and he's now wearing a mask and talking about being prepared for potentially another COVID fifth wave. But actually, worldwide, there are only 40 cases in Denmark, Thailand, Sweden, and the United States. So we're keeping an eye on it. Moderna and Pfizer are also jumping in, coming up with new vaccines to deal with that. They've already committed to Pfizer and to Moderna. I see you scratching your head and cocking your neck. They've already lined up boosters to go into the system on the 20th of this month. So today is September 10th. And like Maya said, this is our 153rd consecutive briefing. Thank you again. And thank you to Maya for keeping us on course there. But in 10 days, these will become available to certain segments of the population, probably those who are most at risk. But the Japanese government has already ordered 20 million doses from Pfizer and 5 million doses from Moderna. And I'm just going to leave it there for you to kind of think about. And maybe through Q&A, we can get to that a little bit earlier or a little bit later. The Ministry of Education, you're following the release of the Fukushima treated water. It is not tainted water. It is not contaminated water, the word we are supposed to use, as we learned last week from the minister's gaffe, is that it's treated water. Anyway, the release of that, it's been going on for the last 3 weeks. The Ministry of, I'm sorry, I skipped over that. The Fisheries Association has now decided it's going to sue the ministry, the Japanese government, and TEPCO for all of the damage that has been done to them through the release of this tainted water. So this is a big deal. You might recall that the government has been dedicating money and funds to help the Fisheries Association deal with the diminution of their sales channels. So 42% of all of the fish that is exported goes to China, Hong Kong, Macau. That has been cut off. A blanket exclusion of fish stock from Japan throughout the country. And Miyagi and Fukushima are the hardest hit, and they are just up in arms about that. And they're insisting that the Japanese government do something about it. Mr. Kishida has been very vocal about it over the last couple of weeks. He actually went to Fukushima. He was pictured eating sushi. Everybody's up there eating sushi. Even the ambassador from the United States, Rahm Emanuel, was up there this last week. So showing support and trying to convince people that sushi and foodstuffs from Fukushima are safe. They're good for consumption. But that is the sales pitch that the government needs to go through, and it's just not enough. It's not valid enough. It is not soon enough for the Fisheries Association. So they have taken the unusual step, first time in Japanese history, where they are suing the central government and TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric and Power Company, for the damages that they have incurred. In response to that, the cabinet approved on Thursday, just maybe 3 days ago, an additional 20 billion yen, which is about $140 million, to subsidize, these fisheries, the fishermen and the associations and the canners and everybody who is affected by this blanket import restriction from China, to have money to survive and to make a living and maybe change their sales channels. But this comes to about 100 billion yen that the government has provided or has promised to provide in assistance for the fisheries. 100 billion is about what the Japanese government is paying for 2 Aegis destroyers. They've been ordered. There are components that are being loaded on. They will be based in Yamagata and Akita for protection of the Japan Sea from North Korea. They're being built now, but 100 billion is a lot of money for just these 2 ships. And every year, the Japanese government has decided to devote 1 trillion yen to the defense budget to increase it from 1% to 2%. So 100 billion purchases 2 ships. Excuse me. That's maybe 10% of what they're dedicated to for that year in a budget, although it will be spread out over a couple of years. The 100 billion for the 2 Aegis destroyers. But this is a lot of money that's going to the fisheries, and it shows you how angry people are about the release of the tainted water, or the contaminated, treated water, excuse me. So that's a very big deal that's going on now, and I think you're going to hear much more about that. New channels will be open. I think that's one of the things that President Joe Biden and the Prime Minister Kishida talked about when they were at Camp David. How can we develop more sales channels in the United States, or encourage more people to eat fish from Japan? So they need to develop their sales channels, and that's what the Prime Minister has dedicated himself to do. In other news, the Ministry of Education requested on Thursday for the Tokyo District Court to impose administrative fine on the Unification Church. You'll remember the Unification Church is the church that came into the limelight as a consequence of the assassination of Shinzo Abe. The fellow who assassinated the former prime minister did so as a grudge because his family, his mother in particular, bequeathed all of the family heirloom to the Unification Church so that she could survive and her ancestors could survive in the afterlife. And now the Unification Church has become a huge issue. Many of the people within the Abe faction, because Mr. Abe was one of the driving politicians for the Unification Church to develop this kind of network of politicians and to replicate what has been done by Soka Gakkai in forming the Komeito political party. So the Unification Church was well on its way to achieving something along the same status and spreading out a lot of money among Japanese politicians. The largest majority of those were, unfortunately, in the Abe faction. So you've got a couple of ministers and influential politicians in the Abe faction who have a little bit of that on them. The Unification Church is being, the Ministry of Education is insisting on this administrative fine because of the 500 issues that were raised for written comment presented to the Unification Church, the Unification Church has been somewhat lackluster in providing responses. And that means, telling, the administrators who received money, how much money they received, who it was particularly from, who was giving them help, and that sort of thing. And they're being a little bit tight-lipped about that, as you would expect. So apparently the process now is to go from the district court and to insist on this fine. The fine is not very much, maybe $100,000 is the maximum fine, but it is the first step in removing the administration of the Unification Church as a religious body in Japan. So it will be removed from that. And that is the process that's being started now. It is a slow walk, not just by the Unification Church, but also by the Ministry of Education, because apparently there are some people, it's kind of like the Epstein suicide, murder, whatever it was. People don't want this news to come out. So it'll be at the district court. They will be most likely, the fine will be authorized, and then the discussion on delisting the Unification Church, which means that it won't have any tax advantages, and essentially it will disappear from the spectrum. And it'll go from the district to the high court, and then from the high court into the Supreme Court. It's going to be a long process there. So it is beginning to start now. All of the documents, when they were first, if you've been following our show, they were forced to provide answers to questions that were presented by the investigative body under the Ministry of Education. And these were boxes of documents that were provided in response to the questions. This went through about 8 reiterations. Could you please specify in this document that you provided to us last week a little bit more specific details? This went through 10 reiterations. The number of files that were distributed in response to that kept diminishing day by day in their 10 responsive pleadings. And finally, in the last one, it was just a sheaf of just an envelope full of responses. So it went from boxes to essentially one document, and I think they've reached the tail end of that, the level of frustration and probably the public's insistence on answers of what was going on with the Unification Church, how much money was being given to them for the statues so that their ancestors can go to the pearly gates, or what politicians benefited from that and how they were able to insert themselves, slowly and surely into the Japanese political mix. So there's a lot going on there. There will be much more going on. The Minister of Education is Keiko Nagaoka. I don't know what her standing is with the new cabinet reshuffle, but since the Unification Church is a hot button issue, you can expect that, you can read through the tea leaves if she stays or if she goes, and who's going to go in her place if she is replaced. So this time next week, we will be talking about the cabinet reshuffle, and it will have a lot of information for us. Looking forward to that. For those of you that are living in Tokyo, you know of Gaien and the ginkgo trees that line that boulevard there. That used to belong to the imperial family. It was a park. They eventually, in the Meiji era, they converted it over to public facilities. They built a museum there, a nice, beautiful museum that very few people actually even know exists. But there are a lot of people that walk through Gaien. It's a beautiful place, especially in the fall. So there is a redevelopment program that we all know about that's guided by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government and Mitsui Fudosan. So they're going to develop high-rise apartments there. They're going to redevelop it. It's going to be ready to move into in, let me see, maybe, what's the date of that? 2036. So this is a 15-year project to get into that. And there is a lot of controversy over that. Some people that are actually in our audience are spearheading that issue. It's a citizens movement to prevent Mitsui from cutting down more than 300 trees and demolishing Chichibu Rugby Stadium. It's a historical stadium. It's still I mean, it's not decrepit by any standard, but the redevelopment project would just completely change the complex there, and the complexion of that area of town. So there is a citizens movement, but they've also come in and they've got UNESCO involved. So UNESCO has an advisory body that's called the International Council on Monuments and Sites. They issued a heritage alert against the Tokyo metropolitan government and naming Mitsui Fudosan as well. No comment from them, of course, but UNESCO is coming in and saying, you know, this is a culturally important site. It should be preserved. And what you are doing for economic development that's going to benefit a few at the expense of, you know, the entire population of Japan or Tokyo, and, you know, this beautiful site. And it's also an evacuation site. So in a highly congested area, it's a green space where if something should happen, like the Kanto earthquake that happened 100 years ago, 10 days ago, they need these kind of spaces, and they shouldn't be filled up with apartment complexes and parking lots. That is the argument that's going on. It's interesting, though, when you compare this to what's going on with Johnny's Gym Show. Johnny's Gym Show, we've reported here a couple of times, is the entertainment industry's number one provider of boy bands and actors and singers. And the founder of Johnny's Gym Show, Johnny Kitagawa, has been lambasted for years about pedophilia and what he's doing with the young boys who are in his troupe. And it's been going on for many, many years. Nobody has, people have looked at it. Bunshun had a 10-part series on it, maybe 15, 20 years ago. There have been some lawsuits, not a whole lot of action, but now it's really, with the death of Johnny Kitagawa a couple of years ago, it's now really coming to the fore. And they've pulled in the UN High Council on Human Rights. So it's similar to that in that the amount of action that is being generated by citizens groups or by the kind of mild press isn't enough. And Gaiatsu, you know, the foreign players are coming in to help provide a resolution here. So it's an interesting insight into how things actually get done and what are the problems and the difficulties and the hurdles for citizens to come together and to fight against the government. But you can imagine going against the Tokyo metropolitan government and Mitsui for a citizens group is rather difficult. So UNESCO being involved is of significance. So it's something that's interesting. We're going to continue to watch that and report on it. The GDP numbers were released on Friday. They were not as good as expectations. And so all of the numbers that are based on GDP, the growth, the inflation rate, wage inflation, that sort of thing, now have to be calibrated on a new number. This is set every quarter. And the results of this last one were that the GDP only grew at 4.8% over the last 3 months. So 4.8%, it looks like growth, but the expectations actually were for a 6%. And even the economists who have been watching this were a little bit more reticent about supporting the government's rosy picture. They predicted a 5.6% increase. And so the fact that the numbers came out lower, it means that the GDP is growing. It's not growing as fast as it should, and it's not compensating for everything else that's going on in the economy. So that means that the GDP figures are falling. Consumer spending fell and wage growth slowed. Actual wage growth not only slowed, but it diminished by 2.5%. So that means the amount of money that people were earning in June and July actually fell because the price of goods and the inflation that was going on grew faster than what they might have gotten as a bonus or as a pay raise. So the Kishida administration is hell-bent on fixing this. The Bank of Japan is also joining arms with them. The easy money policy is likely to continue on. It does provide a drawdown on other aspects of the economy. It costs more money from the Japanese government. It prevents them from doing other more aggressive things they would like to do. But with the slowdown in the Chinese economy, China is Japan's #1 export market. What the GDP numbers have revealed is that Japan depends too exclusively on export growth. So that means external demand for Japanese products. As that slows down, Japan is really in a bind because that has been the engine of growth. Even though 4.8% is nothing to shake your flag about, it is mostly coming out of growth that's coming from external sources. And with China shutting down, it looks like those numbers are not going to be very good for this next quarter. And when you consider that and the situation of the prime minister, his poll numbers are down, his cabinet numbers are down. He can't call a snap election. He's going to be widely criticized no matter what he does with this cabinet reshuffle. It's kind of like a Hail Mary pass, but we'll have to wait and see what that does. But for the third quarter to drop like that, the 3% inflation rate is looking like it's going to be inching up in the next quarter as well. So this is going to be a tough third quarter for Japan, and I think the government is going back. They've already said in October, which is next month, that they are going to reinstall the price subsidies for gasoline and fuel. So that's coming at a good time, but there has been a break, maybe 6 weeks, where that subsidy has been withdrawn. The price of gasoline, in fact, has shot up as a consequence of that. The government is stepping back on that and reinserting that. So there's a lot of money that's involved in here, and one has to wonder, where all this money is coming from. The prime minister is dedicating $100 billion for the Fisheries Association. He's got twice that amount dedicated for a 2-year period for enhancing the quality of life for families of child-rearing age. Get more people interested in getting married and having more children. So there's a lot of that, and just in addition, there's a lot of need for workers to supply the technical demands for some of the semiconductors who are coming into Japan in Hokkaido for Rapidus or TSMC in Kumamoto, and also the Defense Ministry and the Digital Agency. They need highly technical people, young people, who can deal with cybersecurity and all sorts of technical things. Where are these people going to come from? The United States has a bit of a leg up on that, and I'd like to get into that just a little bit now in talking about what's going on with Mr. Kishida, and then I'll wrap this briefing up in about 10 minutes. So Mr. Kishida is in Indonesia since yesterday, and now he's on his way to India. There's a lot going on there. Like I said about snubs, Joe Biden isn't going to be in Indonesia, but he will be at the G20. And so he snubbed the ASEAN, but he's going to G20. And rather than attending the G20 and Indonesia, the ASEAN, he's going to India for the G20. And then he's going to Vietnam. And we're talking about the number of technocrats that are needed for Japan to kind of meet the needs. Vietnam is just on a hellbender. They've got a very young population. And I think the reason why the president is going to Vietnam is because he needs to create some sort of trade agreements with Vietnam to help their economy and to get their economy more dedicated towards a high-tech end of things. So as you might notice, there are a lot of Indians and there are a lot of Russians in Japan that are doing high-tech facilitation. That's because they received education and they were trained 5-10 years ago through the economy there, and its fruition is now that we're getting the benefit of younger people coming in to Japan to fill these needs. Similarly, I think give it 5 or 10 years, you'll find a lot of Vietnamese that will be coming in, not just to Japan, but to the United States to facilitate the high needs that are being generated there. So it's something to look out for. But the prime minister is not going to Vietnam. He's going to India. He's on a roll. He's leading the charge. China is not there. India is there. The United States is there, kind of through the surrogate of the vice president. But Mr. Kishida has been there front and center talking about, you know, what's going on in the South China Seas. He's taking a lot of heat for the release of the Fukushima water, but he is front and center. Z, on the other hand, has got his own issues and he's not showing up. He's got other things that are occupying his mind. And it is raising a little bit of a concern about what his designs are and how bad his economy is. The President Biden not being there is a worrying thing. But then once again, you know, his wife, Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, did come down with COVID, and the president is now fully masked. So when he does go to India and he does go to Vietnam, you can expect to see him with mask. But you can also anticipate that the United States will make a couple of very important pronouncements about the future of the United States in this region. So we're looking forward to that. The other thing that's interesting is Putin is apparently meeting with Kim Jong-un, probably in Vladivostok. So Kim Jong-un will take a train that goes to Vladivostok to meet him. They're going to talk about military weapons transfer in exchange for missile technology, food, and other kinds of joint military operations. There was a report that came out maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that Russia and North Korea are a little bit at loggerheads because although they have been developing certain technologies together, it turns out that the North Koreans are siphoning through cybersecurity exploitation a lot of the intel from the Russians. So a lot of the advances that they've been able to make is through this kind of pilfering of advanced technology from the Russians. So you got to be careful who you're dancing with at the international stage, and apparently also at the local stage too, as some of us can attest. But there is a lot going on this week, and there have been comments made publicly, not just by journalists, but also by policymakers too, that this tectonic change we haven't witnessed something like this in the last 100 years. What's going on in the South China Seas, what's going on in the Asia Pacific region, the alliances that are being formed now, and the military buildup that is involving, a lot of kind of unlikely bedfellows. But the Philippines are getting into it, the Australians, the British, the Italians, the South Koreans, and Japan. And so once again, we come up with this question, this query about what happens with Article 9. So that is still an unsettled issue. It is not an issue that the Prime Minister can currently confront because he's a little bit on his back foot with his poll numbers and the economy being as it is. But we'll wait and see how that goes. But I think, yes, in the very near term, probably within the next 3 or 4 months, we're going to notice some very dramatic changes that impact Japan and Japan's geopolitics and what's going on here in the region. So things are building up for that. In the cabinet reshuffle that we expect to be on Wednesday, so the Prime Minister will come back from India immediately on Wednesday. He will reshuffle the cabinet. He'll announce that. Then the following day, he has a 2-day offsite with his faction. His faction is the 4th largest in the LDP. He will, according to press reports, keep his 2 key features of his cabinet. The first one is Vice President of the LDP, Taro Aso, who was the longest serving foreign minister. He moved on after Mr. Suga and Mr. Kishida's cabinet. He is no longer in the Ministry of Finance, but his delegate, somebody in his faction, Mr. Suzuki, is the Minister of Finance. So he's keeping tabs on that. But he's going to be 83 years old in 10 days. Taro Aso will be. He's going to keep him in his vice president's position, apparently. So he will anchor that part of it, and he will more likely than not keep Mr. Motegi. Motegi is the Secretary General of the LDP, probably the 2nd or 3rd most powerful position in this constellation of political movers and shakers. He will probably keep that position, not because he likes him, because there is a significant rift between Motegi and the Prime Minister. In fact, yeah, it's more than a rift, but apparently Mr. Aso, Taro Aso, is the kind of balancing factor there. So this little triangle that they've got, they meet weekly, the three of them together. He doesn't meet with Motegi individually. That would be maybe a recipe for controversy. But the three of them meet and they talk about policy. The one thing that is missing from that mix is a representative from the Abe faction, which is twice as large as any one of these other competing factions. And as you might know, well, there has been some developments. The Abe faction now is led by a 15-member steering committee. And Shionoya Ryu, who is appointed as the chairman of the group, but he's not really the leader of the group. He's just kind of sitting as a titular head of this 15-member steering committee. So they didn't want to give him too much power, too much force of personality so that he could assert leadership, and then he's going to be the candidate for the next prime minister. I think they've really done a lot of work in preventing that from being the case. They don't want, because of these 15 members in the steering committee, they all want to be identified by the Abe faction as the next prime minister candidate. So it's a lot of internal fighting. They can't make up their minds. 15, it's just somewhat untenable. And so even though the prime minister is thinking about who his cabinet is going to be, in this mix, the Abe faction is not in that triangle because they don't have a singular leader that can help there. One of the things we're going to watch very carefully is the number of Abe faction members who have cabinet posts. So there are about 5 of those. Are they going to diminish in number? Is the hierarchy of their cabinet posts going to be diminished in any way? And if there is, that might be the activant that is required to get the Abe faction together to choose a leader and to be more forceful. But it is a very difficult mix. As we said before, there is a bit of a controversy within the Abe faction because almost 50% of the Abe faction lower house members have been in the Diet 4 terms or less. And it's the guys that are in the upper echelons that have been elected 4 terms or more, maybe 5 terms or 6 terms, and they're in this 15-member steering committee. There's this distinction between the fat cats and then the workers, the first term, second term, third term members, and they want somebody that they can go to with their issues. They don't want to dance around and talk to 15 other people and try and build a coalition on an issue that's important to them. So it is, the logistics there are very critical too. So we don't know if there's going to be a shakeup coming at any time soon there, but you've got the Taro Aso faction, which is the number 2 faction at 55 members. You've got the Motegi faction at 54 members, and you've got the Kishida faction at 45 members. So 100 members, 55 members, 54 members, and 45 members. This group here consists of, the vast majority of members of the LDP in the lower house. So their coalition partner is Komeito. There's been some movement in Komeito. I'd like to just report to you there. So with the, let me see, the Komeito, you might have seen on TV that the Komeito leader, Mr. Yamaguchi, was sitting at a table with the prime minister, signing a document and then holding the document up very proudly. This is an agreement that they formed, and in politics, these are agreements. It's not just a head nod and a shake of the hands. They actually have agreements on how they're going to deal with each other going forward, and they have decided to kind of bury the hatchet. There was a controversy about the 5 new seats that were going into the Tokyo district for the next lower house election. So in the gerrymandering plan that goes into effect for the next election, next lower house election, it is not scheduled until late 2025. So we've got a lot of space between now and then. That's when it must be held, but more likely than not, there will be a snap election sometime before that. But the gerrymandering of the Diet seats, 5 additional ones went to Tokyo, and Komeito wanted one of those seats. They wanted a guarantee that this new seat, that is uncontested, it's virgin territory, they get it. And they went to the LDP to say, we'd like dibs on one of those, and they were refused. And they thought, well, that's a kind of a crappy way to deal with your coalition partner. So they took their ball and they went home and they said, we're not going to support the LDP in any of the Tokyo district 30 seats. There are 29 seats there. We're not going to support your candidates. And maybe throughout the rest of the country, we're not going to support your candidates too. If Komeito did that, there are about 30 LDP members who would definitely lose their seats. They owe their seats to the fact that the Komeito isn't putting a candidate against them in their election district. And on top of that, they have told their Komeito members, we don't have a candidate running in that particular seat. So please dedicate your vote to the LDP member, because nationally that helps Komeito maintain our status. So there's a controversy that was there. Much of it was generated by this coalition that they had with Ishin. You might remember that they had an agreement with Ishin earlier in the previous lower house election, where they came up with the same kind of deal. Ishin, if we don't have a candidate in the district, we will support your candidate. And Ishin said, we will do that, but we really want you to support us to get the governorship of Osaka and the mayorship of Osaka. And we would like to have as many members of our local municipal house to be majority Ishin. And Komeito said, that's good, but we want a couple of those choice seats too. And the result of that was, yes, Ishin got the governorship, they got the mayorship, they got the majority of the municipal elections. And between Ishin and Komeito, they kicked out everybody in Osaka for the lower house seats. So I think there are 19 seats in Osaka. 15 of those are with Ishin, and 4 of them are with Komeito. So that's a big victory for them. But then Ishin said, look, we've had it. We've achieved our results. We've achieved our agreement. That agreement that we signed, it has expired now. And thank you very much. We're moving on to bigger and better things. So that really put Komeito in a little bit of a difficult situation with their alliance partner, LDP. And they buried this hatchet just this last week. So it is significant. They've kissed and made up. But there are a lot of people who just won't forget that, LDP members. Many people blame Mr. Hagiura, who is in the Abe faction, for generating that. He had a friend he wanted to run in the 29th district. And it was his personal decision, because he is the policy affairs chief within the LDP, to make that decision. So it's not just the new Tokyo 5 seats, it's throughout the country. Mr. Hagiura is in charge of defining who gets what seats and what election districts they will run in. And he decided on his own volition that he wanted his friend to run there, and it caused this huge rift. They buried the hatchet there, and it looks like Mr. Hagiura, he's one of the 15 members of this steering committee. He is, like I said, probably the number 2 or 3 most powerful person within the LDP structure, which is different from the cabinet structure, but they're all kind of a tie-in. Whenever the prime minister changes the cabinet, he also changes the LDP structure too. So what happens with Mr. Hagiura is a very hotly looked for issue. Mr. Hagiura is also seriously implicated in the unification church issue. So that's why they're slow walking some of these things. But politics is a funny thing. So you really never know. And it's something that we will continue to watch because it's of such interest to us. Lower House member Masatoshi Akimoto was arrested on Thursday. This is a big deal. There hasn't been an arrest of a lower house member since, 2020, when Katsuyuki Kawai and his wife were arrested for vote buying in Hiroshima. Hiroshima was the election grounds for Mr. Kishida. This is before Mr. Kishida became prime minister. And much of the money that was being spread around is attributed to, without too much proof, but the story is that it came from Mr. Abe to kind of shore up the Abe faction there. Mr. Kawai and Mrs. Kawai are members of the Abe faction. And so this it created a big scandal, and finally, 3 years later, he is now being arrested. I'm sorry, he was arrested a year later. He resigned. His wife resigned. His wife was in the upper house. He was in the lower house. What a powerful combination that is! But they both got it, right in the neck. And so that means, the Abe faction was diminished by two, and also just the scandal taint that goes along with that. But Akimoto being arrested on Thursday is a big deal now. If he resigns his seat, which is likely, there would be a by-election probably by October 22nd. This arrest of him is tied to his support and his receiving a bribe from a wind power generating company in Akita and Aomori. There's a lot of wind development that's going on there because the wind comes out of Siberia, crosses the Japan Sea. It picks up a lot of moisture and a lot of power. So there's a lot of wind generation potential there, and it's really hurtful for the prime minister's green transformation. If you didn't know this, the prime minister wants to go from what they're producing now, 1 gigawatt a year in terms of renewable energy, to 10 gigawatts by 2030. And he wants renewables to be 30%, 36% of the energy mix of Japan by 2030. That's not very far away. That's 6-7 years away. So to get from where we are now with 1 gigawatt to 10 gigawatts is a huge deal. It would generate as much energy as 40 conventional nuclear power plants. So that's a big deal. And the fact that this fellow, Akimoto, who was a proponent of that he succumbed to a bribe, and it's going to take a hit to the prime minister. His numbers reflect that, but also to the initiative for having a robust renewable energy policy in Japan is also very hurtful for the prime minister. So we're going to continue to follow that. It's important not only for the prime minister's political standing, but also for what's going to go on in GX. I'm almost finished here, folks. The Democratic Party for the People had an election. We reported on that 2 weeks ago. They had two candidates for leadership there, Mr. Maihara and then Mr. Tamaki. Mr. Tamaki is the current leader, and he wants to, his philosophy is we need to join forces with the LDP if we want to stay strong and we want to achieve the goals that we have pronounced to our members. Maihara is a little bit of the Ozawa leaning faction, although Ozawa is in a completely different faction. But his idea is we need to join forces with other opposition parties, like Ishin, the Constitutional Democratic Party, the number one opposition party. We need to join forces with them to confront the leadership of the LDP. And this argument was won by Mr. Tamaki. So apparently the LDP and the Constitutional Democratic Party, it's not a very large party, but it would bring another 10 or 15 members into the coalition should they join forces, is a pretty big deal. So one of the difficulties for the prime minister is in announcing his cabinet with Komeito as a coalition partner. What cabinet post did they get? For the last 12 years, they have gotten the Ministry of Land, Transportation, and Infrastructure. That's a long time for them to consistently get this portfolio. It's good news if you're receiving that for 10 years because you begin to develop inroads into the entire industry there. It helps you generate money and more, since it's a national portfolio, you're able to generate more leadership throughout the country for your candidates for lower house or upper house seats. And so one of the controversies is that if the prime minister continues to give land and transportation to Komeito, it really helps them in ways that is not beneficial. So probably in the cabinet reshuffle, the current minister from Komeito, Mr. Tamaki, will be able to get a lot of leadership. And so one of the controversies is that if the prime minister continues to give land and transportation to Komeito, it really helps them in ways that is not beneficial. So probably in the cabinet reshuffle, the current minister from Komeito, Mr. Tamaki, will be able to get a lot of leadership. his name is Saito Tetsuo. He's come up on a couple of our briefings. We'll move on. The Land Transportation Ministry portfolio will go to somebody else, maybe not even Komeito. So if it goes someplace else, that's important. What he does with Mr. Saito is also important, and it's an interesting thing how the calculus is run by the prime minister. Frequently, when the reason why a prime minister is going to shuffle the cabinet, and this is a great example too, is he couldn't have a snap election and come out better than he did before the snap election. He already knew that. So the idea is to have a cabinet reshuffle to refresh things, to kind of get his appreciation numbers back up by putting more prominent people, more women on his cabinet, that sort of thing. Frequently what happens is he makes a couple of missteps. Somebody who is accepting a bribe or accepted a bribe, or maybe they have some skeletons in the closet, it doesn't come out until after they become a minister. And that happens within maybe 3 months. So when the prime minister first became prime minister, there were 3 individuals that got into trouble and they had to resign their cabinet portfolio. That's never happened to a prime minister where he has survived. And Fumio Kishida has done that already. He's actually had more stumbles than just that. So what he's going to be doing with this new cabinet reshuffle is really critically important, and something we're going to watch and analyze and dissect for you this time next week. So keep your eye out for that. Ishin, somewhat like the Democratic People's Party with their election of the leader, Ishin is also having a little bit of a strain in their leadership. As you might know, the founders of Ishin, one is the governor, one is the mayor, and Mr. Baba is in charge of the diet part of Ishin. And the two that are in Osaka, the governor and the mayor, have a view of how Ishin should develop, somewhat similar to what the Democratic People's Party was. Should we form coalitions with other like-minded opposition parties, or should we join forces with the LDP and get a cabinet portfolio? Maybe we would get the Ministry of Land and Transportation. That would be sweet. And that helps us. It helps instill us as a political force, even though we're giving up something by being a coalition member, a junior coalition member. But in the long term, it's going to help us. Or do we join forces with, the distasteful Constitutional Party or the communists or whoever to build a reasonable bulwark against the LDP? Because frequently in elections, people say, I'm voting for the LDP because there's nobody viable that I can vote for. So building that argument is really important. Ishin is going through that right now too. And so the issue is the two that are in Osaka versus the one that's in Tokyo. He's also an Osaka person. Baba is from Osaka, obviously. But how they deal with that. And one of the complicating features of the Ishin struggle of leadership and what their decision is going to be is what's going on with Expo. So we've talked about Expo before. Very shortly, they will hit their 500-day before the Expo opens. I think that will be in October, and then tickets will go on sale. But there have been only 4 pavilions. The last time we reported this, there was only 1 pavilion. That was South Korea. South Korea ponied up and said, we are going to build one of those 50 pavilions that are dedicated to individual countries. So there have been 4 countries that have shown up and said, we will build a pavilion too. But it's way, way past the time for getting the architectural plans in and lining up the contractors and the construction companies to do that. That could be used as a black eye to the Ishin leadership in Osaka. It was their idea to promote Osaka as the site for the Expo. It's a big deal. It's a bit risky. It's a lot of money. If it's done successfully, it really brings Osaka up. And I think, the whole thing about Ishin is to compete with Tokyo. There's this huge competitive force between Tokyo and Osaka. And Ishin is an outgrowth of that frustration and that kind of disrespect that they feel that they're not getting from the central government. So that battle is going to continue. We're going to continue to report on what's going on with the Expo. if the expo is canceled or if it's postponed or if they just leave that site with a couple of pavilions and they don't even run the expo, that will be a big deal. And it will also impact the economy of Osaka and, their electability as leaders for the population there too. So I think that about does it for me, Maya. I think I've gone on long enough. I've probably gone a little bit over time. I apologize for that, but I hope this has been instructive to everybody who's listening in. I'm good for Q&A so that we can get into some of the issues that I missed. Thank you. You will turn on mute one of these days. I love it. I never catch you with that, but.
I know. Yes. Okay. Apologies for this. You can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much. Well, you were right on time, no problem. So I think that you can catch, your schedule, catch up with your schedule.
Great.
Once we finished here with the questions and answers. However, so there are a couple of comments and questions in Clubhouse, and I have one or two for you as well. So please stay online, don't run away. And well, the first one actually from Clubhouse comes from Gerard. We're going back to the topic of the released water in Fukushima. So Gerard's comment is that, well, your comment or you're mentioning tainted or contaminated instead of treated water shows just how easy it is to slip off the tongue. Makes you feel sorry for the poor fisheries minister who got into hot water, or actually he got into heated water. So yes, it is really true. And it also shows how easy, it's easy for everybody, to just use the word contaminated, even though we already know that the water is not really not dangerous for health, or when released, it's not going to cause any more problems there. But
well, the thing is, we will know the true answer to that question or that assumption in 10 years' time, right? We'll eventually know the true answer to that question, but we're not going to know it right now. And so the government is really doubling down for the public relations impact, and to make sure that people understand that it's treated water, it's safe for drinking. Even the ambassador from the United States came by, he ate some sushi. So, join the train. Everything's going to be fine.
Well, that's true. And I still think that it's not only on the government, Timothy, it's also on the industry and TEPCO as a whole, because there hasn't been enough education. I think that, very large part of the population needs to be, let's say, educated on the matter. So, and there has been very little in this regard. So very little information going out and telling people, how things are actually scientifically, scientific explanation and so on. But however, okay, let me go further. So Ren says Indonesia's president will visit the White House in November, and I expect the US to treat him with a near VIP, if not VIP status.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And then now, once again from Gerard about the renewables here. Let me get down. Yes. Renewables, the government should make sure that power companies that buy excess power from residents keep paying at decent rates. These have been falling steadily, the rates. Yes, but I think, yes, Gerard, I agree with you here, but I think that recently, the price actually of the rates have been falling. Yes, because of other factors as well. We know that companies that produce renewable energy, they have been seeing increasing costs of production, and there is something there, which actually influences the rates that the companies pay to the households that produce renewable energy as well. I think this is also a topic which we can talk about in future sessions. And then another question actually from Ren. It's about Ishin, Timothy. So is Ishin, the Ishin party, even interested in Maihara's thinking about teaming up? So that is the DPFP Maihara. He's thinking obviously about teaming up with Ishin. So Ren continues, it seems that if Maihara's proposal were accepted, it would be an embarrassment for his party. Oh no, okay, so sorry, let me reread this comment. So if Maihara's proposal weren't accepted, it would be an embarrassment for his party if Ishin said no. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons, so we talked about this last week. When will the prime minister shuffle the cabinet? He'll do it in the middle of the month, or he'll do it later in the month. And it turns out he's going to do it in the middle of the month. He's going to do it in just a couple of days. And one of the reasons why we thought he might postpone it is because of this issue with Tamaki and Maihara. So Tamaki has now thrown his weight into, and he's kind of committed his party to aligning with the LDP. And one of the ideas was, when the prime minister shuffles the cabinet, he's going to bring in the Democratic People's Party into the coalition. And so they need to reserve a cabinet portfolio for that. It's, Komeito is not going to like that. There's another pretty girl that's invited to the party. We don't like that. And plus, whatever they get as a cabinet portfolio, they could be scratching their heads and thinking, I should have gotten a better portfolio, but then we have this ugly kid who just joined, and now the LDP needs to be nice to them too. So one of the ideas, one of the conceptions was that the LDP is going to grow its weight by adding another coalition partner. I don't think that that's going to happen right now. I don't think there's enough time for it, but there was a lot of discussions on horse trading to accommodate that. And similarly with Ishin could have gone the same way and said, we have decided, Baba has decided, that instead of being a viable alternative to the LDP, we're going to join the coalition and help them and get a cabinet portfolio, and then build out our representation and our weight and our political forces throughout the country through whatever political portfolio that they received, and then challenge the LDP. And I think the decision that was made by Ishin is different from the decision that was made by the Democratic People's Party. Ishin has said, no, we're going to go it alone. The next time we have an election, we're going to kick their ass. We're going to have even more members in the parliament. We did it in Osaka. We can do it elsewhere. And then we will be in the election after that in a position to actually challenge the LDP for leadership of the country. So I think that is their plan. And that's what Mr. Baba has long stood for. I hope that's a responsive, Warren.
Yes, thank you for the answer, Timothy. And then as we go on, so there are a couple of more comments and questions about the expo. But before that, since we are still here, yes, we are still talking about the political, let's say, struggles. I have a question to you about the LDP and Komeito. So you mentioned that Komeito may actually lose their MLIT, that is the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and portfolio this time. But
almost assuredly.
Okay, so are they going to get anything in return for that? Because I can imagine that if they don't, it's going to sour the relationship with the LDP even further.
Well, the Ministry of Land, Transportation and Infrastructure generates a lot of revenue. It's a central part of the economy. So to have that portfolio for 12 years, 11 years, that really, really helps you. So I think they're going to lose that because it is such a choice spot, and maybe get something that is less rich, maybe Ministry of Education. I don't know. That's a pretty rich one too. There's no real ministry that he's not going to get digital. for example. But however it's handled, it needs to be handled delicately. There is still a bit of a bad taste in everybody's mouth because of this rift that they suffered, and then they became not girlfriend and boyfriend for about 3 months. And so this mending of ways and kissing and making up, it's really not that important right now because there's not going to be an election. There's not going to be a snap election for the next 6 months or so. Although, politics being as it is, you just never know. But at least for the cabinet reshuffle, yeah, what's going to happen with their portfolio? Definitely, it's going to the Ministry of Land and Transportation and Infrastructure will go someplace else. I think and Mr. Hagiuda is behind this, right? Mr. Hagiuda is very influential in that. The Secretary General, Motegi, is the one that ultimately makes the decision. But what those ministerial portfolios, how they are distributed, really tells you what the real political mix is. So yes, if Komeito is important, they need to keep them close, then they'll give them a choice spot. And if not, then they'll give them something else. But you just never know. It's going to be an interesting week.
Yes, indeed. And also, I have another question because we we know very well that probably PM Kishida, he is going once again to appoint people. Let's say if there are new members of the cabinet after the reshuffle, that probably they will be people who already have had ministerial positions before. So what are the chances of him giving, a promotion to somebody who has not had a ministerial position so far?
So it's likely, but there is a pecking order. So whenever there's a change in the cabinet, there's probably 1,000 people that are affected by that. They get ministerial positions, they get vice ministerial, they get cabinet administrative positions. The whole kind of structure changes. It takes like 3 weeks for the names to come out, and then they produce this sheet about who is sitting where and what changes have been made. It's maybe not 1,000 people, but it's a large number, maybe 800 people who are affected by that. So the fact there are a lot of people who have qualified to be ministers that haven't been appointed ministers, there's an overabundance of them. So it's unlikely that he would pick somebody that doesn't have the qualifications. That means they've been in the Diet for 4 terms. That means that they have a certain number of votes that they were elected by above and beyond what their opposition party was. So if they have a lot of votes and the opposition was very weak, then they probably deserve recognition either as a vice minister or even as a cabinet minister. The great thing about being a cabinet minister, there are a lot of great things about it, but from then on, from the end of to the end of your life, you are always called minister. It's like being an ambassador. You're always called Your Excellency. So that's a great kind of bragging right that whenever people talk to you, they don't call you just sensei, right? They call you daijin. And even if you serve a couple of weeks as a minister, that's a great bragging right, and it does help you. So people are really eager to get that, even if it's somewhat ill-deserved or maybe a short term, they know the prime minister is going to change or something like that. They still fight tooth and nail for it. So it would be very difficult for the prime minister to justify bringing somebody that he likes in and not recognizing somebody who really deserves it. And there are a lot of people who don't deserve it who are ministers. So don't want to get too far into that.
Yeah, that's a valid point, I believe. Okay, so great. And now we're going back once again to the expo in Osaka. From Gerard, first from Mario. So Expo Tokyo was cancelled. We're talking now about a possible cancellation of the event. And then Mario wrote, Expo Tokyo was cancelled too in 1993, if I remember correctly. And then Gerard says, thanks, Timothy, for talking about Expo. Do you really think it may be cancelled? Won't it be a huge embarrassment for Osaka and Japan if that were to happen? What odds would you give that scenario?
So it's a way to deliver a black eye if you don't like Ishin. You can blame it on the governor and the mayor and all of these Ishin guys who kicked out all of the LDP lower house members. We're so mad. We had a good thing in Osaka, and they joined forces, God damn it, with our Komeito, our alliance partner. They joined forces with them, and they got us all eliminated from Osaka. We are pissed, and we're coming back with a vengeance. And one of the ways to deliver a black eye and say, well, I don't know, you had to close down Expo? Gosh, that's too bad. It sure shows a lack of leadership, doesn't it? So, yeah, I would, at this point in time, with only 4 pavilions out of the 50, yeah, I'd give it 50-50. Yeah, that's not good. And probably if it's broadcast very loudly, that on our show, I predicted, it's a 50-50, I'd probably catch a lot of heat for it. But I think it's really up in the air. But thanks, Jared, for watching that, and let's keep it in the front burner.
Yes, and I think that the government, both the central and local governments, actually, they're trying to find ways out of this situation. And at the moment, yes, cancellation, even though some people are talking about it, yeah, it's not really on their mind. So it doesn't weigh so heavily yet.
Well, the other thing, there are 2 ways that you can tell that there's trepidation about this issue. One is the government is coming up with other ideas. So now they've offered insurance. So if you're going to build the pavilion, you can purchase insurance that is sponsored by the Japanese government. Should things not work out, or should you have cost overruns, this insurance will help you cover that. But the other thing is that the Japanese government could come in and subsidize. So whereas initially to build your pavilion, you're going to spend 100, the Japanese government will come in and subsidize you with 20% of that. So you're only paying 80. So maybe you'll get a little bit more of a reaction from the foreign countries to come in and build these pavilions. But the problem with that is that the prime minister has already earmarked all of the money. I mean, there's more money that's earmarked than is available. So that's where politics comes in. How big a lie are you going to acknowledge after promising people money, the fisheries, the child welfare agencies, the technology, TSMC, to build their high-end wafer factory, Rapidus for building in Hokkaido, subsidizing the fisheries. I mean, it's an unending list. And sometimes you inflate the numbers because you need to boost your credibility, you need to boost your likability. And when it comes time to pay the piper and you can't, you're just hoping that the situation has improved in other ways where you can kind of sweep it under the rug. It happens every day. We report on it every time we have a briefing. So it's an interesting mix.
It is indeed. And on top of all of that, so the expected, what was that? The increase in the GDP didn't
help. And the yen now is at 147 plus change. We continue to watch that. 147 is close to the trigger point, although the chairman of Suntory actually went on a really wide open interview just this last week and said the yen could go to 170. Wow. So there's, what happens when it's at 170? I mean, that means that exporting is very attractive. The demand for Japanese goods and services will expand, but the amount of money that the Japanese get for producing that actually falls. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so Hiroko, thank you very much for the clarification. Yes, the 1996 Expo was cancelled, and then the mayor, Aishima, decided it in May 1995. Okay, and then we have a question from Ted. So the question is, okay, Ted wrote, I'm unfamiliar with the reasons behind the tension between Prime Minister Kishida and Mr. Motegi. Can you describe for us the nature of the relationship? Are they simply rivals for power, or are there other reasons for the problems between them?
That's a great question, Ted, and I suspect you already know the answer. You're just kind of testing me, but thank you very much. And it's always great to have you in on the briefing. And by the way, your posts on LinkedIn and Facebook are outstanding. I continue to follow and learn from what you're doing globally. So congratulations to you. And thank you for your service. So Motegi is Um, yeah, he's disliked even within his own faction. And within his own faction, he's got two factions within his own faction, and they're constantly struggling with each other. He has been able to rise to the top just because he's the kind of individual that he is. He doesn't suffer fools easily, and he's very brusque, and he's very sharp. He's a smart cookie, and he's just somebody you don't want to tussle with. And he is driven by an ambition to become prime minister. And the prime minister feels that very acutely. He ran against Mr. Kishida for prime minister just this last election, and so the communications between them is not very good, and the communications faction to faction is not very good. So, in fact, many people describe the LDP as kind of a big tent that has a bunch of three-ring circuses going on at the same time. They're somewhat unrelated, but they are all under the big tent providing entertainment to the people who have paid for the price of the ticket. But with Motegi's faction and with Mr. Kishida's faction, there is some pretty intense rivalry, and the personalities between the two clashes. So that's why Mr. Abe, Taro Aso, did I say Abe? Taro Aso is so critical to this mix because he's kind of standing in between them. 83 years old in 10 days. He is kind of the standard bearer and the peacemaker. He's been prime minister twice. He's not going to be prime minister again. He doesn't even have a cabinet portfolio. He is the vice president of the LDP. He still holds a central role, and I think he's playing that role very astutely by balancing these two forces. It's somewhat easy for him. If there was a third party or a fourth party in that mix, it's going to be much more difficult. So maybe it's in Mr. Aso's favor and benefit for the Abe faction to be somewhat, they don't have somebody that they can really speak through with one voice like they can with Motegi, that they can do with Kishida, that they can do with Taro Aso. So an interesting mix. It will be resolved at one point, and that resolution might mean that the Abe faction splits up and there are two, maybe three factions as a result of that. But the reason why everybody's staying together in the Abe faction is because the pure power that is represented by having a voting block of 100 Diet members, you can achieve a lot. But having the spokesperson and the voice to speak and represent all of that energy is the critical element that's lacking.
Well, thank you very much for the explanation, Timothy. I think that, we're getting close to 10 o'clock, and I know that's the time when you need to run. So, yes, okay, we have one more comment in Clubhouse, and it is from, from Richard Walton. Thank you, Richard, for it. And let's see.
Richard.
So, related to Fukushima, the reaction from China is clearly politically motivated,
yes.
but it is important to remember that the nuclear industry in Japan has a long history of being dishonest and corrupt. Some of this is self-inflicted. Yes, indeed. Well,
yeah, but you don't need to limit yourself just to the nuclear industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think
but it's not a characteristic of Japan uniquely either. When you're in politics, when you're in this kind of industrial kind of governance, there is so much money there. It boggles the mind how much money is there. And if you're careful, and if you can skim a little bit, or if you can steer a little bit, even a little bit is a lot. So the temptation is very large. So I think it's just human nature, and that's why clean government and having ethical leaders is so important. And that's why in the Japanese mix, to have these these positions that are passed down through heredity, that it goes from father to son to grandson, is typically viewed as unhealthy. But it's not a unique feature to Japanese politics, but it is a characteristic that comes up in all analysis of how to understand what's going on in Japanese politics.
Okay, and then one more question from Ren. Would you please share with our listeners what exactly the fishermen are suing. Maybe
Okay.
suing for. Okay.
Okay, it's kind of easy. And I think as we were talking about how much money is involved, and if you're a little bit clever or somehow you can direct a little bit more towards your interests, and a little bit in this context is a lot of money. So the Japanese government has already earmarked 100 billion yen to promote and protect and to kind of defend the fisheries industry. And that means developing, since China is out, 42% of their market is gone, like instantly. As soon as the water started hitting the Pacific, it's gone. The blanket restrictions on importation fell immediately. So now they still have their catches. They didn't diminish their catches at all when China brought down the trade barriers. So there's a lot of fish that's available. You can now pick up hotate. Hokkaido is the hardest hit of all of the prefectures because of this. They are a huge fishing industry centered in Hokkaido. But hotate now globally, you can pick it up for pennies, whereas before it was an expensive, luxury delicacy. So the fisheries prices now are falling in order to take up this slack. So you can't store fish that long, and the markets don't open up overnight. So having a significant price point, so that people say, I haven't had fish. I usually eat meat and potatoes and vegetables, but fish is really selling, and there's a couple of advertisements. It looks pretty good. I saw something on television on how to prepare it. So let's try that, right? So the money that is being developed is also supporting those prices. So the fishermen, they expect to get 100 for selling their fish, and now they have to sell it into the international markets. They're only getting 60 or 50. Maybe the government is coming in and supporting them and giving them an extra 30 or 40 even, so that they can pay the bills for their laborers, or they can pay for the shipping expenses or the gasoline, whatever. But the controversy here is that the two prefectures that have filed this suit, or the fisheries associations in the two prefectures that have filed this suit, they're basically folding their arms across their chest, and they're saying, yeah, 100 billion, what the hell? We didn't get that. You're distributing it to these other guys. We want some too, and we're going to sue you because we're suffering more than anybody else. So it's a kind of a tactic to get this 100 billion up to a bigger number, and then we won't sue you. Or of this 100 billion that's already earmarked, let's recalculate so a different portion goes to these combatants, these fishery associations in Fukushima and in what's the other prefecture? Maybe Aomori. It's not Aomori. Pardon me? Miyagi, that's right. Earmark some of those funds. We're not going to increase it beyond 100 billion, but let's dedicate it to them and make them shut up and withdraw this suit. This is an unusual suit. So it is just, we are diminished as a result of your decisions, your sloppy management, the fact that you couldn't fix the tainted water. I'm sorry, treated water. You couldn't fix the treated water so that China didn't get so mad. But yeah, like Ren said, it's a political thing. The fish that's being produced in Fukushima and Miyagi is better than the fish that's being harvested outside of China's nuclear reactors. So yeah, it's hugely political, and I imagine at some point in time. So the Chinese tourists that are coming into town, they're eating Japanese fish and sushi. There's no diminution there. So apparently the Chinese tourists love it, and it's enjoying a bit of a boom. So I hope that responds to the question about what they're actually suing for. They want more support. They're suffering because of the Japanese government and because of TEPCO, and so give us some money, goddammit.
Yes, and also Ren, he expanded with a little bit of explanation that according to NHK, they are suing to stop the water release immediately on the ground that the government and them have an agreement in which both parties will not make a move unless both parties had agreed to make the move. In this case, the water release. Yes, I believe that the way you word, your claims and the claims anyway is kind of different. It's like Diomote and Ura here, in Japan, but yeah, there are quite a lot of things going on there. So thank you very much, Ren, for giving us this information as well. And so Timothy, I know that you're already, getting ready to run. So thank you very much to you for delivering the briefing today. Again, this was the 135th briefing, and we are going to be here once again next week at 8:20. So thank you to everybody who kept with us, stuck with us this morning. Okay, Ren, just a moment. Oh, okay. So thank you for that. And yes, we are on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse today, and all the recordings will remain there, so you can go back and listen to them again if you want to. That's all for the moment. Yes, thanks a lot, Hiroko and Ren, Richard, Mario, and Ted, and everybody Gerard
Thank
as
you.
well, who commented and asked questions. That's all. Timothy, have a good Sunday, and to everybody, enjoy your weekend. Thanks
Next
a lot.
week's briefing is going to be another blockbuster, so please tune in and please tell your friends about this briefing. We keep getting great comments from people who have stumbled on us and have commented to either Maya or myself privately what an insightful briefing it's been. So thank you for the support and the encouragement. Please tell your friends.
Thank you for making it so insightful, Timothy.